In the last devlog, I finished the first third of this level, but after going back to it, something felt off. I decided to rework anything I thought wasn't as good as it could be, and as you'll see later, I ended up changing a lot. When I finally returned to the second part of the level, I was hit with the realization that after all the work I put into the first part, I'm still only a third done. It was a sort of existential dread that I don't experience often. Like I finally understood just how much work it'll take to finish this game. The thing about game development is that working on even a simple feature can be really mentally exhausting, just because of how much you have to think about the best way to implement it. As an example, I wanted to improve the atmosphere of the mine by adding asbestos particles that fall from the ceiling. Initially, I considered adding particles at the bottom of the screen and pushing them up to the closest ceiling, but that might be unnecessarily complicated and might not work in certain circumstances. Instead, I decided to use simple spawner objects, which can create dust in a specified area, and also fit the bumpy shape of the ceiling. That's great, but if one spawner is wider than another, it will appear to create dust slower because it covers a larger area. So I adjusted the spawn probability to be dependent on the spawner's width, meaning wider spawners have a higher probability of creating a particle each frame. I'm really happy with this effect, it just took a surprising amount of time to realize. Graphics in general were a big reason I continued to rework the first third. Like usual, I created some new sprites, but this time they're mostly smaller objects, like wires, ropes, metal bars, and some others. I don't really have much to say about them, but I do find that just a bit more detail goes a long way. A larger sprite I made was this wooden beam, which is implied to support the structure of the mine. It definitely fills up a lot of empty space in the background, but I also think it contextualizes the level better as a mine rather than just a cave. I also updated the tile set again. I added some new tiles to use later in the level. I darkened the bar tiles so that they're more clearly a part of the background, and I added more detail to the ground tiles. Most of the reason the ground tiles look better is because I added another color. The original only had 3 colors, a base color, a shadow, and a highlight. The new color is somewhere between the shadow and the base color, allowing for a more natural gradient. I think 3 colors can look kind of flat, unless you use dithering or something, so I think in the future I'll use 4 colors more often because I quite like the look. Lastly, you probably noticed the player sprite looks different. One more time, the reason I haven't finalized the player sprite is so that I have the choice to change the dimensions, hitboxes, etc. before I commit to a final design. This time I added a sort of skeleton to better represent the player, because I found the previous sprite made it more difficult to interpret the scale of the world. I also made it green so that it can flash white when taking damage. All the other changes are gameplay related. First, I adjusted some of the level layout. It's hard to say exactly what I changed and why, but as an example, the first room is much more cramped and has some of the specific tiles switched out for other tiles. Maybe it better funnels the player into the start of the level, but I think something is definitely better here. Now for the most significant change, being the enemies. I like to think of the challenges in a level as being either a part of the layout, hazards, or enemies. Before, there weren't many enemies besides the bat and the miner, so I wanted to add a couple others to make the level more interesting. The first enemy I added was this rock lump. It bounces towards the player in a random trajectory and takes 3 hits before dying. I quite like this enemy because it's just unpredictable enough to make you tense up a little bit while you try to attack it without being attacked yourself. It also bears a striking resemblance to a character from a previous failed project. The next enemy is this bug with a barrier. It starts out dormant, but if the player gets close, it begins to move back and forth very quickly. When damaged, it gets knocked back. It has 2 hit points, so you can kill it very quickly if you can land a quick combo attack. This enemy is great to put on ledges to catch the player off guard, and generally maintain a good state of flow. I also removed the bat because I felt its strategy of moving towards the player wasn't that interesting. Maybe I'll rework it, but for now it's gone. Throughout the level I sprinkled some of these enemies, but my favorite instances are where the barrier bug surprises the player near the edge of this ledge, and where the rock clump adds even more difficulty to the already crowded climb area. So, after all that work, I have to say I think the beginning is much better now, and while it's still not perfect, it's good enough that I'm comfortable moving on for the time being, and finishing the rest of the level. The second third of the level starts with this torch, which is the checkpoint of the game. When you walk past it, it activates, and even acts as a light source. I think it looks nice, so it makes for a good level element. Next, there's a series of ledges, which are fairly easy because there's no hazards, at least until this section, where you encounter the first use of the trapdoor for platforming. You have to time jumps underneath this loose ceiling, but you have to keep jumping to ensure the trapdoors don't drop. I think this makes for a good challenge, and I'll definitely iterate on this design later in the level. You then lower into an area with not one, but two new hazards, barbed wire and a nail gun. Both of which have actually existed in the game for a while, I just haven't used them until now. I think they're both pretty self-explanatory: don't touch the barbed wire, and don't get shot by the nails. Here you have to maneuver on top of the nail gun to pull a lever, which activates a step just back in the upper area. Once you take the step, you find a room underneath several loose ceilings, populated with a few rock clumps. You have to approach them to attack them, putting yourself in danger of falling rocks in the process. I think this area tests well the player's ability to move around in busy spaces, and it also uses the new tiles, so that's nice. Through the following tunnel, you find this really precarious ledge where you have to attack a miner from. It's not actually that difficult because the miner can't hit you, but you need to be mindful of where you jump to land some attacks. After that is the end, so far. Naturally, it's going to take a lot of work to actually complete this level, but I have many reasons to be optimistic about the progress of this game from here on out. First, later parts of the level still use assets from the earlier parts, so I don't need to create everything from scratch like I did in the beginning. Second, the full framework of the game isn't fully finished yet, so when it is, I can basically entirely focus on the level design itself. As for the whole dread thing, it's definitely helped a lot when I can make so much progress, and I can be more confident that finishing such a large project is something I can handle and will achieve. But also, as with most things in life, it seems that handling problems on a small scale is preferable to worrying about the whole project all at once. So with that said, if you want to keep up with future updates, please consider subscribing. Thank you. Bye.